The genetic engineering of humans provoked a fierce debate about ethics and morality, and now the Chinese authorities are taking steps to further control the practice. On Monday, the State Council, China's cabinet, published new regulations to heighten the protection of human genetic resources. The move comes months after a Chinese geneticist announced that he had created the world's first gene-edited twins after altering the DNA in their embryos in order to make them HIV resistant. More than 120 Chinese scientists immediately issued an open letter condemning his actions, saying the Pandora's box has been opened, but we still have a chance to close it before it's irreparable. So do the new regulations give us that chance? How effective will they be? Join us for the discussion in the studio are Assistant Professor Zhang of the Beijing Normal University and Liu Yunyun, an editor with the Beijing Review. Welcome to both of you to The Point. So another emotive topic, and you just had your second baby, so I guess you must have a lot of feelings to share with us. But tell us a little bit from the rational side of things. How different or how significant are these new regulations that just been signed into a decree by the Chinese Premier?
I think you're mentioning the first draft regulation, which is promulgated in 1998. Comparing with today, it's like about 20 years. A lot have changed, and I think one of the significant changes is that it has punishment. It stated detailed punishment against those who have violated the regulations, and a fine as much as 10 million yuan will be punished upon those who violate the rules. I think that's a big step forward. And another thing is that it says cooperation with a Chinese company, with a Chinese institution is very important. If a foreign company is going to set up a company engaging in this business, I think this is very, very important, because as far as I know, there are a lot of foreign companies in China doing this kind of biochemical research in China, and they reap a lot of benefits from the drugs they've been developed. But we don't. So this is a big step forward in that direction.
Professor Zhang, does these new regulations clearly stipulate what is allowed in terms of gene editing or what is not? For instance, I think the reason why we're having these new regulations is precisely because of the outcry, right? The controversy we all witnessed because of that gene-edited twins. So now, do the new regulations make it clearer what can be done, what cannot?
So this particular regulation is actually only one piece of the jigsaw puzzle. So this is related to data, to genetic information, the specific research conducts and clinical trials. So those regulations will come later in the year, presumably this year. So those will actually lay out what's allowed and what's not allowed more carefully. But this one does, as already mentioned, that there's a lot more details, procedurals, in terms of international collaborations or whatnot. The kind of things you have to follow,
Actually, the new regulations, I understand, stated that biological research and relevant clinical tests should comply with Chinese laws and administrative regulations and rules. But after the Chinese geneticist He Jiankui last year announced that he managed to genetically edited the genes of 2 embryos, the Vice Minister of China's Science and Technology Ministry told the press that a 2003 regulation permits gene editing experiment on embryos which are only allowed to remain viable for 14 days. So that is still in place, right? But we're going to know more details as to whether designer babies can be made or not later, or Ms. Liu?
You know what? We have a problem, not a problem, we have a symptom in China, which is the public institution and a private institution. I talked to officials from Ministry of Public Health. They're saying it is easy to track the research projects of public institutions because, they have regulatory authorities and they have to report like in a kind of hierarchical way. So it's very easy to monitor and oversee their operations. But for private institutions, they're getting their funding from private enterprises, and they're getting funding from maybe individuals. And if they don't report to the regulatory authorities, and nobody would know about it. Just like in this case, you mentioned He Jiankui, who genetically edited the embryos. And he voluntarily announced to the public that he had done the research. Otherwise, nobody would have any idea what he was doing. So this kind of system is still a prevalent situation in China. But I think we are doing progress in, there is a fine in place.
Harsher fine.
Right. And so that may to some extent regulate the behaviors.
How stringent or how legally binding are these regulations? Because they're not laws, right? They're called regulations. Will they be as biting as laws in China, in the case of China?
Well, in China, well, it's a different situation. When you have punishment, I think people will have, be very cautious when they're doing something against it. So I think there is one improvement in China, which is in the past draft regulation in 1998, 2 government departments are responsible for, the overseeing of this kind of cases. But now only the Ministry of Science and Technology is involved. So it's streamlined the process, and if there's anything violation happens, and you will easily to find the authorities.
Right. Well, immediately after the He Jiankui case, just a couple of months later, China's National Health Commission, which is also a top government department in terms of public health, they also publicized draft regulation on biomedical experiments, asking for public opinions, and it said that various violations will result in a lifetime ban on biomedical researchers. I think these regulations probably are more pertinent, more relevant to the experiment that were announced last year. What's the relationship between what we're seeing now and then this regulation that was publicized for public opinion and previous laws? Mr. Zhang, do you have any idea about how the Chinese, because we do have a huge bureaucracy, we do have a huge system.
Yeah, so getting to know who's in charge of what is really important. So the whole point of the rogue scientist that actually got away with what it did was, first of all, that regulation you mentioned in 2003 didn't lay down punishments. So that really was just the governing. The governing body is just basically saying, no, this is frowned upon, you better not do it. But because it was laid down so early, that regulation, gene editing wasn't really a thing back then, and it wasn't updated by consulting to scientists. They really should do this, periodic reviews, but anyhow. And also, no department was really in charge, so the guy could just fly under the radar and nobody raised any red flags. And this time, so this particular regulation is different from the one you just mentioned. So that one would basically, the fine is something from 500,000 to a few million Chinese yuan. So that would prevent more adventurous scientists from doing cavalier experiments. However, I don't think that would be sufficient. That if there's commercial interests coming in, that the potential gain is in the billions, then this could be chalked up as pretty small business expense, right? So in the future, on top of this current information law, in the future, there needs to be like the research guidelines made into law, I think, with better punishments.
So what are we going to foresee? I mean, are we going to see a ban on designer baby if such regulation comes out, or will eventually, this possibility could be open when the technology is ripe? Because on the other hand, on the one hand, we don't want to see designer babies simply for vanity reasons, or we don't want to see designer babies when the technology is not mature. But when the technology is mature and secure, there are people who are saying it could be useful for good cause.
So there are voices within the scientific community that says this genetic therapy does have its values. So our life expectancy is getting so long. The usual things that kill us cannot do that anymore. The chemical drugs are doing pretty good job. So now the intrinsic problems within our body governed by the genes starts to become important. So if we want to raise genetic life expectancy even further, so genetic therapy will probably be unavoidable in the future. The issue is when you should be doing that. So in this case, the notorious case, the line is pretty clear because he was doing something not strictly necessary, pretty dangerous because the way he did it, there could be unintended mutations. And also he was doing it for personal fame and fortune, so it's never a good thing. But in the future, if this matures to a level where people are comfortable with it, you shouldn't stop this for the sake of stopping it.
Can I jump on in?
Of course.
Well, I'm glad Beijing Review didn't make any judgments on whether this is good, whether He Jiankui did was good or bad. We just presented opinions from all sides. There are people criticizing him, there are people who support him. The thing is, we didn't know what will change in the next few decades. I remember clearly when the first test tube baby was born in 1978. In the UK, there are huge criticism, there are huge debates, and even today in the religious community, people still cannot accept it. But now this technology has helped millions of families getting their babies. So I, as a mother, I'm very happy for these parents to have their baby if they cannot have the baby in a natural way. So, and this professor, the doctor, get a Nobel Prize 30 years later. So at that time, he was not recognized. But then after 30 years.
Are you implying that He Jiankui might one day get a Nobel Prize?
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we should not base our judgment on assumptions. And there are people saying there are essays on Nature which titled, well, genetically edited babies might have shorter life expectancy than normal babies. I mean, we do not make judgments on might or what might happen.
That creates a problem. That creates a problem for the regulators, right? For the legislators,
exactly.
Because how do you keep the door ajar, but wide enough for the hope, for the possibility to go forward, but not totally shut, so that you just stall the progress of human development.
Right. Well, historically, scientists have sacrificed themselves and do the experiment on themselves. That's one way. Another is if there's really nothing else that's possible, there's only way. And, well, the failure is there's going to be a problem 20 years later. And without doing it, you get 3 months life. Then in that case, you can probably do that. I'm not. There's other societal ethical issues
I think
involved.
we need to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Okay, for now, let's see, yeah, indeed, we will revisit it in a couple of decades, maybe, if we're still around. Many thanks to Zhang from Beijing Normal University and Liu Yunyun from Beijing Review. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.